at ET Now, we've been showcasing the very best in business at the Global Business Summit 2017. And the biggest event of the year so far, GBS 2017, was the go-to destination for some of the biggest global CEOs, the tallest leaders of India Inc., and the brightest economic thinkers. Day one of the summit saw topics like globalization and protectionism take center stage, with the focus on the Donald Trump regime in America and the geopolitical uncertainties in the Middle East. Day one also saw a unique insight into the working of the biggest new media group, Vice, from its founder Shane Smith. And to cap things off, spiritual leader, yogi and founder of the Isha Foundation, Sadhguru Jaggi Vasudev, shared his mantra for life along with his reasoning for sound business success. Here's the best of day one of the Global Business Summit.
The question I was asked to talk about and want to focus on for a bit was the question of whether or not globalization's in trouble. Is it in danger? Have things like Brexit in the UK and the election of Donald Trump in America fundamentally changed or endangered those trends that were so much an important part of our global economy over the course of the last 20 or 25 years? And the answer I would give is maybe. And I'll want to come back and talk to the dangers to the global economy in a moment. But I think in terms of talking about the political process inside the United States and how it might affect things, I'd like to focus on that for a minute. The election last year by the Republicans as their nominee, the selection of Donald Trump, was a surprise to nearly everybody. In terms of President Trump's policy views, which I know are of great interest to everybody, things like NAFTA, WTO, trade in general, the position I think that he has taken is to say that he believes that sometimes in the past the United States did not do a good job of negotiating on some of those deals, and as a result, he would like to go back and address some of those trade agreements. He claims to still have a desire to be very active internationally in the international business community, and certainly to call him a protectionist, I think it's too early to say for certain. I'm very concerned as I look back over the last 70 or 75 years that we're now at a time when those trends and developments, such as the things that were mentioned in terms of the growth of globalization and growth of trade, that we had a situation where we moved to basically a unipolar world. The United States obviously was preeminent. The Cold War was over when I was Secretary of Defense. Back in the early 90s, the Soviet Union went out of business, and there were a very, very positive set of developments as a result of that period. But that period's over with. The Cold War is over and has been over for some time, but we're still in a situation now where I believe there are a rising number of threats that threaten the security of the United States and of many of our friends and allies, and probably even constitute a threat to the globalization trend and movements that you're focused on here today. So I look at the situation in respect to the United States and Russia, for example. It wasn't that long ago when Gorbachev was in power, when the Soviet Union went out of business, when Europe was liberated, the nations of the old near abroad, the old Soviet Union, achieved sovereignty and independence. But it looks to me like that's changing fairly dramatically as I watch Mr. Putin operate in the Soviet Union. That he believed that the end of the Cold War and the Soviet Union was a disaster, and I think he has aspirations of trying to correct that, or what he sees to be a disaster. Another aspect of Mr. Putin's conduct is the issue that's now very much in the headlines home, and that has to do with cyber warfare, cyber attack on the United States. The fact that he took his capabilities in the cyber area and used it to try to influence our election. There's not any argument that at this stage that somehow the election of President Trump was not legitimate, but there's no question but what there was a very serious effort made by Mr. Putin and his government, his organization, to interfere in major ways with our basic fundamental democratic processes. In some quarters, that would be considered an act of war. I think it's the kind of conduct and activity we'll see going forward. We know he's attempted it previously in other states in the Baltics, and I think it's very much, I would not underestimate the weight that we as Americans assign to the Russian attempts to interfere with our internal political processes. We look at China. China, of course, is very active in the South China Sea, claiming territory that before was viewed primarily as international waters, building military bases where there were none before, and developing new technologies, active, for example, in fielding the capacity to take down satellites, also very active with respect to cyber warfare. Excuse me. And I think increasingly aggressively presenting themselves throughout Asia. I look at North Korea. One of the worst, most dangerous spots we have today on the face of the earth is what's going on in North Korea. And we have a head of government who's absolutely, totally unpredictable. We have, obviously, a situation where the North Koreans have successfully built and tested nuclear weapons, at least 7 so far. They've begun launching missiles in groups of 4 at a time. There's some evidence to indicate that North Korea is working with Iran on the development of warheads and on the development of ballistic missiles. That's not a threat we can ignore. And so I would watch for developments in that area going forward. Again, I'm speaking as a private citizen. I don't have access to any classified information, just what I see in the press. But it's extraordinary, the speed at which he's moving in ways that are a threat to much of Asia, certainly Japan, South Korea, very close friends and allies of the United States, and something that we'll be focused on going forward. I think about Iran, another area where we've got very significant emerging threats and programs. I was not a supporter of the agreement that President Obama signed with the Iranians, but I think they will move rapidly down the road of developing their nuclear capability. They are the world's premier state supporter of terrorism. The situation, especially if you look at the possibility of a cooperative effort between the North Koreans and the Iranians on these issues, is of great concern. One of my big concerns is that there will be another major attack, but next time they won't use airline tickets and box cutters. They'll use something far deadlier. And we have to be concerned as we see a problem of the proliferation of nuclear weapons or other kinds of weapons of mass destruction, that those fall into the hands of a terrorist or a terrorist organization. That would be of great concern. If you look at the state of the U.S. military today after the 8 years of the Obama administration, the budget cuts that have been imposed have been very, very serious. We're now at a point as we go through the budget debate in the weeks ahead over how do we allocate more money to our military. But if you look at the testimony of the Joint Chiefs, Secretary of Defense just last week, we're in front of the Senate Appropriations Committee, and it's very clear that the consequences from 8 years of the Obama administration has been devastating for the United States military. So it'll be extremely important for us going forward, and a key challenge for the Trump administration to find ways to reverse those trends, reverse those courses, and to rebuild our military so that we can achieve once again the kind of set of relationships with our allies and our adversaries that we enjoyed in the past. I personally believe that this is the most challenging security situation, most complicated group of threats that we've seen since the end of World War II. And I think as we go forward over the course of the next several months and years, it makes good sense to be concerned about globalization and are wanting to be able to continue the benefits that we all derive from the growth of the world economy. But we must keep in mind, I think, that we're in a situation where the political circumstances, the national security circumstances, the military, proliferation of nuclear weapons, the rise of terrorists, a group of aggressive nations like North Korea, Russia, etc., are of great concern. And I think will increasingly be a dominant part of the debate going forward in the United States about what set of policies the Trump administration pursues. Thank you very much.
What really is happening in the world today? Is it growing protectionism? Is that what we are going to get used to? Are we going to get used to more barriers, trade wars maybe, WTO disputes? May I ask Rick Lesser? Rick, you've been meeting with a lot of global CEOs. You know what's happening in America. You probably are also very familiar with what's happening in what may happen to President Trump's policies, given what we saw a couple of days ago. So can I just ask you, are we looking at more trade wars? Are we looking at more protectionism? Or is it all just smoke and mirrors?
I think the first thing we're looking at right now is a world of much more uncertainty. And if I just step back for a second, because we'll get to the challenges of trade, I think the last decade, I was sitting here in the first row, and I was thinking about the last time I was in this exact room, and it was 10 years ago, and we were at a worldwide BCG partner meeting here. I think our India team at that point was a little over 100 people. Now it's over 1,000 people. But we were talking about the world, and I was thinking about what's happened in the 10 years since then, and we've seen risk change fundamentally on 4 dimensions over that decade. We've seen risk in a macroeconomic sense, obviously, with what happened in the great financial crisis less than a year later. We've seen it in cybersecurity and the uncertainties we feel that is at a different level for most companies and individuals. We've seen it in pandemics and the health risks that exist today from superbugs and other things that we need to consider in ways we didn't before. And to your last point, we see it in a geopolitical environment that feels much less stable and much more uncertain than it did before. And it's easy to step back. I want to get to the opportunities in a second because it's easy to miss that. But it's easy to sort of look at this in a short-term environment and just pick on one issue or another. But I think fundamentally we have to deal as CEOs in a different risk framework than the risk framework we dealt with, not so many years ago. I think right now, I don't think it's destiny at all that we'll end up in a protectionist environment. I think the administration, I happened to hear Secretary Ross, the new Commerce Secretary, speak about 10 days ago, specifically talking about this issue, is from the United States' point of view, the new administration, President Trump, I think is clear through several of his leaders, Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Ross, have talked about wanting to expand trade and to continue to evolve trade, but to do it on a different basis. They perceive that the basis that the United States has negotiated on in the past, when the world was at a different place, wasn't balanced, and they want to get to balanced trade. But in order to get there, they believe they need to have a bit of a stick as well as a carrot, and the stick is if they can't get there, they're prepared to take more aggressive action. But I don't think that's the intent or the desire to end up in that place, and I think their hope is by willingness to be clear up front that they're going to take a tough view on trade, that they hope that that will lead to negotiations that can avoid that and get to a world that improves trade.
Right. They want to expand trade. David, if I could come to you on this. Brexit hit Britain. He's talking about free trade. Donald Trump is also talking about free trade, though he's saying fair trade. And as Rick said, there's a stick along with the carrot, and they will really want to expand trade. Is that what we are actually going to get into now? Despite all this talk and all this bluster probably and all this propaganda about border tax and we won't let you in and you go back to your country, it's going to be the same again. What do you think?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here. I think we have to pause for a minute. We have had some shocks in the last year which have definitely challenged globalization and challenged free trade. But if we look back over the last 20 years, we've had huge benefits from globalization and free trade, and the estimates are many, many hundreds of millions of people around the world lifted out of poverty. Some say as much as 1.5 billion. On the other side, we've had products, innovation, services, food delivered to billions of people around the world at a much lower cost and with much greater satisfaction relative to income levels than we've ever had in the past. So a lot of that we take for granted, but I think we need to sort of pinch ourselves and remind ourselves of the huge benefits that free trade and globalization has brought. Now, maybe getting closer to your question, technology has rolled on very fast. The Internet of Things, that's all enabled free trade, but it has meant that some people have felt left behind. Now, there's two options on that. One, you say, well, let's stop technology. Let's stop the development of the Internet. Let's stop product innovation, robotics, and so on. But, we've tried that through the centuries. It's a bad thing. It lessens the benefits for mankind. But right back to the Industrial Revolution in Europe, we tried that. It didn't work. So that's not an option. The second option is probably for everybody to think hard about those who have been left behind by technological advance. And I think that is a challenge for governments and for the corporate sector to stand in and fill some of that gap and to reskill. And there's some great examples of that around the world. I would like to see us do more to look at those examples. That was part of the issue in Brexit. I'm not going to give a speech now because it would take hours. There were many, many competing factors in Brexit, but part of it was people feeling left behind and communities where jobs had been lost and people hadn't been reskilled. And I think we should take that challenge to see what we should do about it.
So a little bit of a redoing, restructuring of free trade agreements and how global trade politics has worked. Let me give you an example. Andrew Liveris, the CEO of Dow Chemical, made a statement a couple of days ago where he said that whatever has been happening in the last 3 or 4 decades, we've gone too far on one side. And we now have to come back and we have to take stock. Professor Feldstein, if I can ask you, and if I can probably, you've written extensively about Donald Trump's trade policies, and you have also commented on it, and perhaps more than anybody else, you know the mind of the man, so to say. What do you think, sir, is really going to happen? Is there going to be a greater push towards liberalization and globalization, but in a different form?
So my sense is that there's still debate within the senior parts of the Trump administration, but I think in the end, we're not going to move to closing markets. We're not going to move to trying to destroy globalization. I think that there is a desire to open markets, to increase our U.S. exports to other countries. The business community is very much behind the globalization process. We see it not just in terms of what we import and what we export, but the fact that there are global links in the production process. So components are imported, the products into which they're embodied are re-exported, and we can't bring that to a halt. And I think that's why, as we move forward, we're going to see a strengthening of that process rather than a destruction of it.
You started in '94, so that's before Monica Lewinsky was an intern in the White House, and a lot of... How has been the journey? I mean, how's the journey been? You've seen the landscape change also in front of you.
Well, I think we have an affinity with Times of India because we started as a magazine. So we
Right.
were print, we moved into digital,
Right.
and it sort of took us 10 years to get to 1 million copies of the magazine. And then it took us 1 year to get to 10 million uniques a month. So we knew that the future was digital.
Right.
And we were first movers into digital content online and native advertising.
Yeah.
And then after that, we moved into television. And now we believe in all 3 screens at the same time.
You also believe in sort of cross-platformizing in the sense that, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have had content which was initially for either the net or mobile, which now you're sort of repackaging in China for television. Is that correct?
All over the world, not just
All over,
China,
okay,
but
okay.
all over the world. Yeah, I think we were the first online news company
Yeah.
to actually move into television, and we moved into television in our first year. You know, internet news at the time was considered here, and TV news was
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
And so we were the first to actually move from online to TV, and the first year we won 2 Peabodys and an Emmy for Best News Series.
Yeah.
And so that sort of showed us that we could be gold standard. And so in China, for example, we do a thing called the Creators Project, taking Chinese creators out of China to the rest of the world, and then they come back to China. So we love taking, content creators from various countries, and we're very excited about coming to India,
Yeah.
actually, to get, there's so many creative young people here in music and in fashion and in food and in travel, and sort of take them out into our platforms around the world.
Why did you choose to partner with Times of India?
Well, I think the very easy reason is, well, there's 2 reasons. One is they're very good at, I was saying to someone last night, the New York Times should have done what the Times of India did, in that they took their brand, very trusted brand, moved into TV, OTT, mobile, et cetera, online.
Yeah.
And for our company, we looked at that and said, that's what we have to do in India as well. We want to be on all platforms at all times. And I think that they're the best in India, and as an old print guy too,
Yeah.
the biggest publisher in India. So they're a perfect partner in a perfect fit sense. But last night we went out for dinner with the senior management and the team, and I've got to say, just as people, they're fantastic. And when you do a joint venture, you're going to be married for a long time, so you better like them. And I think that they're some of the best, smartest, most dynamic people in India, and we couldn't be happier than partnering with them.
You host The Vice on HBO show, and, what's the stories that excite you? I mean, as both CEO and journalist, I don't think.
I think last year what was exciting is we did a documentary with then President Obama.
Yeah.
And all he and his team wanted to talk about was how the Republicans stymied his administration. I don't know if Dick Cheney's still here.
Yeah.
And then so we said, well, let's go talk to the Republicans. And the Republicans talked about how the Democrats stymied them. And so basically, it's the intractability of both sides and how Washington ceased to work.
Okay.
And then we sort of predicted the Trump election
Right.
because of this frustration.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is very interesting.
But there was let's say the documentary in North Korea, for instance, or even the one with Syria and ISIS. How do you get in touch with these guys? I mean, I have trouble getting an appointment with a secretary.
Yeah. A lot of times we just ask.
Politely?
Yeah. Well, we're not going to be sort of angry.
Okay.
Give me an interview.
Okay.
We were the only news organization to embed with ISIS,
Yeah.
which we did because we said, look, how is it that these people can recruit 60, 70,000 foreign fighters every year?
Absolutely.
And so we embedded in ISIS, in the Islamic State, and saw them.
Why do you think they would let guys from New York come in and, do stuff with them?
Because we are non-political, we're non-paradigmic,
Yeah.
non-partisan, we press record, and we say, okay, let's see it. So when we do something on Obama, we do something with Speaker Boehner and Cantor, et cetera. When we do something on ISIS, what we're trying to do is show why they're popular, because it's a conundrum. When we go to North Korea, you know, for example, again, referencing Dick Cheney's speech, we hear a lot about North Korea and saber rattling, and for sure they're doing very questionable things. But it reminds me of the Cold War, when it was on our side, you know, commies eat babies, and on their side it was the American gangsters, and there's so much rhetoric and propaganda. And when you actually go to a country is made of people. And generally those people are nice and fine. And now the regime or the leaders are different, and they do very terrible things. But when it comes down to it, when we went there and did that documentary, you see the people, and the people are just people.
But it's also kind of brought the millennials back into the political picture in that sense. I mean, earlier they were, you know, doing their thing. They were moving away from mainstream media. I'm not going to say that they're coming back to mainstream media, but they're engaging much more. So I guess that is where trust issues with the media comes into play, right?
Yeah, I think you had a whole generation that came of age with weapons of mass destruction, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, collusion of the media with the government. And so, you know, you had a lot of distrust and distrust in brands. And so they decided to make their own brands. And one of those brands was Vice, because they chose us. We didn't choose them. We were just making content. They chose us because we were non-political and making this sort of press record type journalism that resonated with them. We're the fastest growing news platform in the world because our audience is demanding it.
Just going to sort of ask one last question before we wrap. I mean, broadly, your philosophy is going to be intact when you come to India? I mean, in terms of, you know, the content, and obviously you'll have to tweak things according to local sort of issues and things. What are your non-negotiables?
Look, we're in 80 countries, and every country is its own and has its own specific you know, benefits and challenges. I think India is such a large, complex, dynamic country. We're not here to say we're going to solve anything or we're going to demand anything. What we're excited about is tapping into the great creative young people here who are so, again, thirsty for content, but also want to make things, tell their stories, and get them out on our platforms around the world. So we're excited to sort of do both, to bring our content, but also to take content from India.
And I think you can also say that you're also diversifying in beer, right? Do you want to, like...
Well, okay.
You have to.
So we believe that the 30-second spot is dying, the commercial, the ubiquitous commercial. And so you have to find, you know, different ways of monetizing. And so we come up with different ways of doing things. We have a strategic in-house agency called Virtue, which is coming to India. And they're the millennial agency for a lot of brands. One of those brands is ABI, Anheuser-Busch InBev, the largest beer producer. And so they went to ABI and said, what do you have a problem with? And they said, you know, microbreweries, craft beer, hipster, breweries, they grow big, and then we have to buy them, and it's expensive. And then they came to me and said, well, what's your problem? I said, well, I have this sports content that I put on ESPN that a lot of people are watching, but I don't want to just have Budweiser spots. I want to do something different. So they said, okay. So they went and did thinking, and they said, let's make a beer, and it'll sponsor the sports show. And I said, okay, great. And so they gave us a brewery in our office, which made our employees very happy. And so every Thursday or Friday, we'd have pizza and beer, and we sort of tweak, you know, put a bit more hops in it or whatever. And so we finally made the recipe, and we went to Budweiser, and they said, oh, this is fantastic. We actually want to launch it in 14 markets. And I just got a text this morning saying we're going to sell 1 million pints in the UK this year. It's doing very well. And so I don't have to do media anymore, I'm just going to sell beer.
See, that is the future. Yeah.
That's the future of media,
yeah,
booze.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What is the meaning of happiness? Because every individual happiness is different.
There is no meaning. It's just that if you know how to be joyful, then you don't want to be any other way. What is the meaning? There is no meaning. First of all, what's the meaning of your existence? You're born and you will disappear and die one day. Yes? So you must understand this. Before you and me came here, countless number of people have walked this planet. Where are they? All topsoil now. You will also become topsoil, me also, okay? Don't think only you. You will also become topsoil unless your friends choose to bury you real deep, fearing you may rise from the dead. You know, there have been some instances at least, where somebody rose from the dead and lots of things happened. So, the question is just this: have you been happy sometime in your life? Have you been miserable? You make your choice, okay? You make your choice. I am not telling anybody you must be happy. If you like misery, what's my problem? I have no problem. It's just that I like to be among joyful people. My wish is, if the entire world becomes joyful, it'll be a better place to live for me. I'm just trying to create that. I am not instructing anybody you must be joyful. But it is in the nature of life, not just human life, it is in the nature of life, if it is possible, from a worm to an insect to a bird to an animal and to a tree, everybody is trying to be as exuberant and full-fledged as possible. Human beings, they become a little depressed because they don't know essentially how to handle their own cerebral capabilities. This is a new happening, you know. This cerebral possibility in the evolutionary scale of things, it's a new possibility. You know Charles Darwin? You heard of Charles Darwin? He told you that you were all monkeys, not me, him, okay? He told you were all monkeys, your tail fell away and you became human, you know the story. He said something like this, I'm making this very simplistic. He said something like this: a goat could have become a giraffe, a pig could have become an elephant over many millions of years. But a monkey became human rather quickly, you know. Genetic scientists are saying the DNA difference between a chimpanzee and you is only 1.23%. 1.23% is not much of a difference, isn't it? Not much of a difference. Between chimpanzee and you, that is how close you are physiologically. But in terms of your intelligence and awareness, you're worlds apart. Or in other words, your problem is just this: you have an intelligence for which you don't have a stable enough platform. We can give you a simple technology with which you create a stable platform so that your intelligence works for you. If your intelligence worked for you, would you keep yourself in the highest level of pleasantness or unpleasantness? Pleasantness. If unpleasantness is happening, you must just understand this. You can call it stress, you can call it tension, you can call it misery, you can call it depression, call it whatever you want, you can find more exotic names to it. Essentially, your intelligence is turned against you. Once your intelligence turns against you, no force in the universe can save you.
Sadhguruji, I would like to… Can I ask the question?
Yes, please, sir.
The main focus should be on stress management, because if your stress is under control, you need a less sleep, you can do away, you are cool, your life also goes up. Do you think that is the mantra you would like to give?
No. This happened to me when I first went to United States many years ago. Everywhere I went, people were talking about stress management. I could not understand why would anybody want to manage stress. Because in my understanding, we manage things which are precious to us. Our family, our wealth, our business, our money. We want to manage all these things. Why would anybody want to manage stress? Then it took me some time to see that people have made a conclusion that stress is a part of their life. Stress is not a part of your life. Stress is just this. Stress is not in your work. Stress is not in your family. Stress is not in the world. It is just your inability to manage your own mind, which is stress. You don't know how to manage your mind, you do not know how to manage your body, you do not know how to manage your energies, you do not know how to manage your chemistry. You're kind of blundering through life. I'm asking you, is it true that this human mechanism is the most sophisticated machine on this planet? Do you agree with me? I'm asking you, have you read the user's manual? No. Just somehow do it. If you somehow do it, you think stress is normal, depression is normal, misery is normal. These are not normal. Joy is normal. As a child, you were joyful, just by nature, isn't it? Now you are thinking misery is normal. No. This is simply because without reading the user's manual, you are trying to blunder through life. Well, when you manage things accidentally, anxiety is natural.
Hi, Mr. Andy Bob, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Andy Bob West, the founder of Hyperloop.
I could not hear that.
I am the founder of Hyperloop Transportation Technologies. When you manage a global company like I do, I feel the responsibility of my choices because I know that this influences millions of people today and in the future. So I try to give myself a rule. If something hurts me, the people around me, or the planet, I don't have to do it, right? But the problem is that a lot of the time, these kind of choices are also influences your investors or people that actually believe that they can make money.
Those
in your
people
company.
who give you an existence.
Exactly. So how do you reconcile these two forces that apparently are working one against each other?
So those who give you an existence, now they are the problem. We have to rethink this. It's because of their investment you exist, but now they are the problem. It's always like that. See, when you need money, you'll go to many places, sometimes beg, sometimes crawl, do whatever. Once you get the money, you always think one who gave you the money is a big problem. That is a natural thing, you know.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.